Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Connie Lauren Bowie. I'm the Executive Director of Inclusion International. We have a great list of speakers today. We're really pleased to have so many people joining us. Our first session for this webinar series was yesterday, and we had over 90 participants for 2.5 hours, participating from all over Russia and some other countries as well. I'm going to ask everyone to please mute their microphones and also to turn their video cameras off unless they are speaking. When the speakers are asked to take the floor, we'll put their cameras on, and that way you can see who's speaking and their presentation. I'm going to do some housekeeping first, which I'm going to do slowly, and we will repeat some of these instructions in the chat box so that you have it throughout the morning, afternoon. First of all, please make sure you're on the correct audio channel by pressing the interpretation button, which is in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. In the icon looks like a globe, and there you have the option of either English or Russian. Even if you're hearing the audio in your preferred language, at the moment we'll be giving presentations in both languages, so please make sure that you've put the translation button onto the language that you would like to listen to the presentations in. Subtitles are available in English. To view them, click on the CC button, the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen. You can view the full transcript by clicking on the link, which we will share in the chat box. So the captions provide quick words at the bottom. If you want to see the full conversation in English, click in the link that's in the box. Please keep your microphone and camera off during presentations so we don't have any distractions or feedback from the presenters. And we may mute you if we hear any feedback or background noise from you. If you require technical assistance, you can raise your hand or write in the chat box, and our team will be happy to help you. Nancy and Vlad are here for technical support in English and Russian. We've dedicated a Q&A session through several Q&A sessions throughout today's workshop. To ask questions, you can raise your hand or type in the chat box to unmute yourself. We're recording today's session. Please only turn on your camera or microphone if you consent to being recorded. Please introduce yourself in the chat box and feel free to ask questions. We'll translate them and ask the speakers in the open discussion sessions. So I think that's my housekeeping responsibilities this morning. I want to start by saying that we had a really good discussion yesterday with many speakers. I was really impressed by the level of contribution and discussion that we had. I will ask Sue and Denise to just reflect on yesterday's discussions in a moment. I think the first day of our session, we really focused on what does inclusive education look like? What does it mean? We were getting acquainted with different horizons and scenarios of inclusive education for children with disabilities and their families in Russia, and we identified some key challenges in the implementation of inclusive education. One of our other objectives is to study the role of international standards and mechanisms in achieving inclusive education in Russia, which we had the privilege of having UNESCO contribute to yesterday, as well as other international perspectives. So yesterday was really a conceptual day. We spoke about many different topics. Today we'll go deeper into teacher training and multidisciplinary approaches to teacher support. I will ask Sue to just give some reflections on yesterday's discussion. And then Denise as well from international and Russian perspectives on how we went through the day yesterday before I introduce to you the speakers for today. Sue?
Thank you, Connie. I kept wishing yesterday that we were in a room together so that we could exchange really our passion about these issues and not just our knowledge. And obviously there's a lot of that. There's a lot of need and desire to speak to each other and really hear each other. Yesterday, I learned the same lesson that I learn over and over again, which is there are international mechanisms in place now that we have fought for, all of us, and they are there and we can use them. And also that there's expertise in countries often based in the parent's perspective and in understanding what parents see when they look at school for their sons and daughters. We just need to dig in on the goals of really getting some agreement on definitions of what inclusion is, and to figure out how those international standards and mechanisms can be used in Russia. I think that was the tension. There was, on the international side, people were saying, here's what we have, please collaborate. And on the Russian side, people were saying, we have analyzed this thoroughly and we are ready to collaborate. So let's collaborate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sue. Denise, did you have any reflections to share about yesterday's conversation?
I'm just going to say a few things. Я хочу себе представить, во-первых, меня зовут Денис Роза.
Well, first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Denise Rosa, and I am the director of Perspectiva Moscow. We are one of the co-organizer of this event. We're very happy that yesterday took place, that the webinar took place. And today our organization is promoting inclusive education, has been doing so for more than 15 years ago. And when we started 15 or 17 years ago, there was no legislation dealing with these issues, and there were no experts. Yesterday, I was happy to see the experts, Russian experts, joining in the discussion and learning of the rich expertise and experience. Of course, there are certain problems. Please, could you switch off the microphone? Somebody, could you switch off the microphone? Could you switch off the microphone, please? Somebody's mic is on. It is important to be a resource for you, for other organizations, for teachers, for parents with disabilities.
And we are developing our projects with more than 20 partners in more than 20 cities of Russia. And we have a resource that we do with our partner Inclusion International. And Inclusion International has been with us for a number of years. And I hope that we will stay an important resource for you to promote inclusive education all over Russia. So I hope that this event today and tomorrow will encourage you to meet new partners, new people to work with, to cooperate, and this will help us to resolve issues in the cities where we live, and to support people with disability, to make them included in the life of society. And we have chat. Please feed your contacts. If we do not have them yet in our database, we'll have them included. Everybody spoke a lot yesterday. Ideas are many, but they usually come at the very end. So if you want to present some ideas, just make sure that you speak about them at the very beginning, and we want to have a discussion. Please write in the chat if you have any questions, and then join the discussion and have a good day.
Thanks, Denise. I will, first of all, thank you also for reintroducing the hosts, Denise. I did not do that before we started. I think we will have a slightly different audience from what we did yesterday. So welcome those who were not with us yesterday. Today, we are going to focus on giving you some more practical examples. We're going to have examples from New Brunswick, Canada, and from Portugal, as well as Russian examples of experience of teachers, teacher training, support to teachers, and multidisciplinary approach to teacher training. May I, just before I introduce the speakers, say two things. If you have resources to share and you're not a speaker, please feel free to link them in the chat box. And the second thing is that we tried hard yesterday, and Denise just mentioned this. Please, if you are one of the speakers speaking today, be aware that we have a limited amount of time, and we are going to ask you to stick to the time that you've been asked to use, and we may have to cut you off if you are going over your time. So I apologize ahead of time for that. All right, so we are still on time. In our first session, we're going to have some really practical examples and contributions. We're going to start with my friend and colleague, Gordon Porter, who I'm going to ask to get ready to put his PowerPoint up and to put on his camera. Gordon's going to talk to you today about the experience of New Brunswick and teacher training experiences in New Brunswick, Canada, one of the parts of the world where we point to as a good example of inclusive education. I will let Gordon introduce himself, but I would like to say that we often introduce Gordon as being an expert from New Brunswick. I've lost count, Gordon, of the number of countries in the world where you've done teacher training and worked with governments and families. So Gordon's experience reaches well beyond New Brunswick, and he has a vast amount of practical knowledge to share with you. And if there are teachers and educators on the call, we will share the resources that Gordon's sharing today, and I'm sure that he would be available to you if you were looking for more information. So Gordon, I'm going to let you take over the screen, which I see is now up with your presentation. Welcome, Gordon, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Connie. It's a pleasure to be here. It's morning here in New Brunswick in Canada, and I have a few minutes to share a few thoughts with you about inclusive education. And I guess the first thing I would say is that New Brunswick is a small province in Canada. We're also one of the least wealthy parts of Canada. And in some ways, that's really important for how inclusive education has developed here over the last 30 to 40 years. The fact is that making our schools inclusive is not something that has to be seen as requiring wealth beyond what is typically used to make public education a quality program in our countries. And in the case of New Brunswick, that's very true. First of all, I want to share my experience. I've been a teacher, a school principal, a director of student services or special services. I had training as a clinician in learning disabilities and children with reading difficulties. And all of that sort of came together in the early 80s when I joined a parent group that ran a segregated school for children with intellectual disabilities. And since that time, my experience has been balanced between being someone working with parents of children with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities, and as an educator and a leader in the educational system in the community where I live. So my experience is based on that balance. I've also taught at a university. I've been a human rights commissioner in New Brunswick, and I've been active as a advocate for inclusive education wherever I've been able to be helpful. So one of the things that I would say based on my experience is that inclusive education is as much a political and policy issue as it is an educational issue. My experience is that if we give teachers effective policies, they can figure out and learn from each other how to support inclusive education in their schools. So my message to you at a fundamental level is that by strengthening inclusion, we can strengthen schools. Every investment we make in supporting inclusion in schools has the opportunity or brings the opportunity to increase capacity in the school as a whole. Now, a few of the myths. There are a few things that are obstacles, and there's a long list, but I've just highlighted two of them here. The first is that the myth that schools are only about cognitive development and academics. And that, of course, is simply not true. What schools are preparing for is that young people need to develop their knowledge, their skills, their sensibilities to be a citizen in our communities when school is over. So it's not just a question of cognitive development. The second myth that I want to talk about is that professionals always know more than parents. And that as well is not my experience. My experience is that parents have a lot to offer and can do a great deal for us when it comes to educating their children. So we need to respect parents' involvement in their child's education, and teachers need to listen to them. Now, can I just ask someone, maybe Connie or Fede, when I look at my screen, my slide has all kinds of blue lines on it.
I see that too, Gordon. We'll see if we can figure it out while you're talking. It is possible to read the slide underneath it. I'm not sure what's going on. We'll see if we can fix it.
Is it perhaps that someone has the ability to mark their own and it's coming through to the whole presentation?
Yeah,
Nancy?
that's it, Gordon, but I've removed them. I think they were doing it by mistake, but you can delete the annotations if you click on the little rubber at the top of the screen. There should be annotations. Alternatively, you can just start to share again. I think it will delete it.
Okay.
I can assume control.
I've got annotations. What do I click to eliminate them?
It looks like a little rubber.
That's an eraser.
Sorry.
You can still
Oh,
read it.
okay, I see it.
You got it? Yeah, it's clear now.
Perfect.
There we go.
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
Sorry about that. Okay, so my next point, the goal of inclusive education. First of all, it isn't just about children with disability. It's about creating and supporting better schools for all of our children. All of our children benefit from making a school able to accommodate all the learners who might go there. So we want to make our schools inclusive, which will help make them better schools. Now, to do that, the focus needs to be on supporting teachers, Many times I get criticized or get comments about the fact that for me, the thing we need to focus on is supporting classroom teachers. And people say, well, really, you need to primarily focus on the children. And I certainly agree that the children are critical to this whole undertaking. But the fact is, it's the teachers who deliver the programs and the support to the students in an inclusive school. So as people supporting inclusion, we need to focus on the teacher. What does the teacher need to be successful? What does the teacher need to know? What kind of supports are needed? Those are all the things that we need to address for the now, for some reason, I can't make my slides go forward.
If you just go back to the top of the screen, it thinks you're still trying to erase things. So you just need to take off that setting.
So just close annotate.
Yeah, there you are.
Okay. Sorry about this.
Gordon, this is Denise. Can I suggest you put on slideshow? I think then you
Yeah.
won't have any problems. You won't have the problems you're dealing with now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about this. We learn new things with Zoom. Okay, so what's required to create inclusive schools? We need practices to accommodate student diversity, things that the teacher will do. We need to really emphasize that in all the decisions made in a school, that inclusion is a guiding principle. We have to ask ourselves, if we do this, will this help us advance inclusion or will it limit inclusion? And we have to focus on school improvement for all of our students, not just the students that typically do well in our schools. Okay, a few quick points about what it takes to create and support an inclusive school. The first thing is it takes a plan. And in my experience, a plan to move from traditional practice, special education practice, to inclusion will take at minimum 3 to 5 years to do it properly. You can't snap your fingers and overnight schools will be inclusive. So there needs to be a plan. It needs to be laid out with the objectives, the goals, and the responsibilities of the people involved to make the plan be implemented effectively. Secondly, we need to make sure that school staff know to make their schools and classrooms effective for diverse students. And so we need to invest in training for existing teachers, for school leaders, and for new teachers. So there needs to be effective training and effective discussions and conversations and engagement with teachers, school leaders, and new teachers. Third, we need to ensure that there's an understanding that teachers need support to meet this challenge. We need to work with them to develop supports they need, especially instructional strategies. Now, instructional strategies is a whole discussion that would take many, many hours, and in fact, days to go through effectively and to share with classroom teachers the things that they can do that'll help them be an inclusive teacher. There are a lot of words that lead us into those practices, like universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, personalized planning, cooperative learning, a whole variety. And effective use of innovative, inclusive instructional strategies is a key. We need to start by creating positive models of success. Classrooms and schools in communities that do a good job. And we need to share that success with their neighbors and with others. And I think this program today, in fact, is part of that. You're going to hear from a couple of international speakers, myself and Paula, but you're also going to hear from some people within Russia who are doing innovative, positive things. My experience is that when you're transitioning from one approach to the other, you need to make the people who are going down the path first into success heroes, people who are held up as exemplifying the kind of practices that you want everyone to employ. So sharing success is a big part of the process. We need to identify leaders, innovators at the level of teachers, principals, school leaders, people who are leaders in the parent movement. We need to build networks of support. We need to involve professionals like psychologists, therapists, and make them all part of a team where we produce and share knowledge about how inclusion can be supported. We need to identify and share best practices from research and knowledge and from our own experience. There is an incredible amount of knowledge available now about inclusive education. When I first became engaged in this in the 1980s, there wasn't a whole lot of information about inclusive education. There was information about teaching per se in regular schools with typical children. There was information about special education practices, but the two were not really joined. And you need to join those two things together. How kids with special needs can be taught in regular classrooms with their peers by typical teachers and be successful. So best practices in that sense need to be identified and shared. We need to understand that innovations and changes will make a difference and they require resources. That means money and people. It's not going to be very easy to transform schools if we don't spend money on changing and coaching and supporting teachers to change their basic practices. This has been found over and over. When we try to do something and don't provide essential and important support, then the change is not very successful. So investment in the change is necessary if we're to have success. Now, let's talk about money. First of all, my experience, and this is in work situation as well as across Canada and in other countries as well, is that money is not the issue in moving from segregation or exclusion to inclusion. The issue is how money is spent. Now, segregated special education draws money out of the education system into special services that are the thing that we want to eliminate. So we need to take the money and put it into the regular system, into the regular school, so that children can be supported and be successful in their inclusive classrooms. Investment in schools is essential and critical. And in most cases, the starting point is to use the money that's available better, to move it from segregation to inclusion. Now, during the change process, it may in fact be highly, highly effective to spend additional money in order to transition from one system to the other. But as an overall concept, money should never stop us from building inclusive schools. So my message in sum is that strengthening inclusion is a way to strengthen our schools. Every time we provide teachers with support to deal with a difficult situation involving a child or a group of children, when we help that teacher figure out how to do things better, more effectively, that teacher is better equipped to handle that problem in the future with other children and to use that experience to generate different ways to handle other situations as time goes on. Teachers need to be problem solvers. And as we increase our support to them and help them solve problems, we're strengthening their capacity to be effective teachers. So I always try to emphasize that every investment that we make in supporting inclusion in our schools helps increase the capacity of the school as a whole. Many people think that if we spend money in an inclusion program, it's withdrawing or taking away support from the regular school, and other children will suffer. In fact, I believe the exact opposite to be the fact, that when we strengthen the school by supporting teachers, by investing in coaching them, training them, helping them solve problems, we're building the capacity of the school for all of the children, those who have special needs and those who do not. And with that, that's my short take on inclusive education. And I would welcome opportunity to answer some questions later on in the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gordon. It does feel like you've only just touched the tip of the iceberg on so many issues, and I hope that people will have a chance to ask you some questions directly. Also, Gordon, I think, is going to stay on and listen to the examples from Russia, and I think maybe Gordon can reflect back on some of the things he's been pointing to when we hear the specific stories of examples from Russia. We're going to turn from New Brunswick, Canada to Portugal. Paula Hunt has joined us today. Paula is a member of the Catalyst for Inclusive Education of Inclusion International, but also a senior technical consultant with UNICEF and others. And Paula is going to tell you some specifics, examples from Portugal, but she's also globally an international expert on inclusive education and works with us in a number of ways. So we're really happy to have Paula with us today. And she will also, I hope, stick around through the day so that she can answer questions afterwards. Paula, you have the screen and your microphone.
Thank you so much, Connie. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I am going to speak to you a little bit about Portugal and inclusive education in Portugal. Inclusive education in Portugal is very much the responsibility of Gordon Porter, because when you come to Portugal and you talk to people who have been involved in the system for a long time, everyone knows Gordon, everyone knows who he is, and he has been an inspiration for myself and also for many other people in the country. So I am not going to focus so much on the philosophy behind inclusive education. I think that Gordon has done that much better than what I could. But I am going to talk to you about Portugal because Portugal is a little bit of a different system than what you see in the rest of Europe. At the moment, all the laws that guide early identification, early intervention, and education are aligned with international conventions, specifically with the CRPD, CRC, and the CEDAW. Early identification and early intervention is the shared responsibility of the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Social Protection. And there is compulsory education for all children between the ages of 6 and 19. And this compulsory education takes place in their neighborhood school, which is a regular school. So there are no special schools anymore. The law mandates that all the measures be available for all children. In other words, you do not have to have the label of a child with disability in order to be able to receive supportive services. And the supports and adaptations are all geared towards providing inclusion, or the inclusion of children within their education environment. This is completely different than what it used to be when I was in school, for example, in the mid-60s. And it is completely different than what we see in many of the other countries in Europe, including in the Russian Federation. I think that in the 60s, the situation in Portugal was very much the same as it is in other countries. In other words, children with disabilities were at home or they were in institutions run by the Ministry of Social Protection. I did not even know that children with disabilities existed until I was probably in my mid-teens, when I realized that one of my neighbors looked different than me. In the 1970s, many special schools were opened by parent organizations, mostly those that had children with disabilities. And then in the early 80s, the first time that children with disabilities are mentioned in the law was in 1986, when a law decree came out that said that the Ministry of Education was responsible for the development of special education. At the time, there was no such thing as inclusive education. We did not talk about inclusive education, but there was this responsibility that children with disabilities needed to be a part of the education system in some way. Sorry about that. The law, although it said that children with disabilities, that the ministry needed to create special education, this was not necessarily sufficient to make sure that all children went to school. So in 1991, a new law established that education was compulsory to all children with special educational needs, including children with disabilities, in what we usually call the least restrictive environment. However, this actually reinforced integration and was not sufficient to ensure that inclusion was going to come about. Of course, in 1994, we had the Salamanca Statement that changed the way in which people look at the education of children with disabilities. And then in Portugal, throughout the 2000s, a lot of pieces of legislation came out in connection with the signature and the ratification of the CRPD. So legislation on accessibility, on anti-discrimination, on individualized support, on early intervention, of course, the signature and the ratification of the CRPD. All of these combined actually have an impact on what the education law and the education landscape looks like in Portugal. In 2008, a new law came about, which was the law that we generally know as the Inclusive Education Law, that again ensured the right to education for all children. It attempted to recognize the barriers to participation that already existed within the education system. It made a distinction between disability and special needs. In other words, saying that you can have a child with a special educational need that does not have a disability. And it required that special or additional supports be determined by an interdisciplinary process and an interdisciplinary team. again, bringing together people that don't necessarily always come together to look at how to best provide services for one particular child. Importantly, within the process of identification of disability and disability assessment, not only in education, but overall, became focused on the use or integrated the use of a tool which is called the International Classification of Functioning, which I know is very well regarded and very well used in the Russian Federation. As good as the law in 2008 was, problems became apparent shortly after. First, it required that children be identified or categorized in order to be able to receive services. Second, it was completely dependent of a parallel system of special education. It allowed for segregation to exist inside the school and even inside the classroom. So you had a child that was attending a regular school, but once they entered the school doors, they would be sent to a resource room, for example, or to a segregated classroom, or even in the regular classroom, they would be separated from the rest of the students and they would be working with an assistant, for example. And more importantly, was that children who did not meet criteria for special educational needs were completely ignored by the system because they were not visible to the support system of the schools. In 2018, there are two new laws that came out within one day of each other, which have completely altered the education system. One is the Law Decree 54, which is what we have today, which tries to respond to the challenges of the previous legislation, takes into consideration all the comments provided by the CRPD committee, and establishes primarily that students do not need to be identified as students with a special educational need in order to be able to receive support services. The law focuses not on access to education, so we're not talking about allowing a child to enter school anymore. Now we're talking about presence, participation, and success. And success not from the point of view of an assessment, an international assessment such as PISA, for example, but success from the point of view of the student, what the student considers success for them. It is based on a student profile, which contains both knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and provides measures of support for inclusion for all students. At the same time that Law 54 came out, Law 55 also came out, which establishes a flexible curriculum that is based on a personal profile at the end of compulsory education. You might say that even though there are guidelines for a full curriculum, each child can have their own profile based on the existing guidelines of the curriculum, giving flexibility to teachers to maneuver through the difficulties of a very rigid curriculum. So the two laws, as I said, they came out within one day of each other, and they have a very symbiotic relationship in that you cannot have an inclusive education system without having a flexible curriculum. The impact at the implementation level, of course, collaborative work is completely different now than what it was a couple of years ago. You have teachers, students, and families expected to be able to collaborate much more closely to each other. You have different partnerships because you have partnerships between schools, local authorities, and private sectors, not just in a vertical way between central government and local government, but also across horizontal lines. The management of the resources has been left up to either schools, clusters, or municipalities so that they can better respond to the communities that they're serving. Universal design for learning is the curricular and the planning base of schooling. And there are a multi-level intervention use and a flexible curriculum. So what is this multi-level intervention? So intervention for all students that at any point enter into the school system begins with universal measures. And universal measures are those measures that affect every student and that aim to promote the participation of every student. So things like Gordon already mentioned, universal design for learning, differentiated curriculum, you have curriculum enrichment, you have positive behavior management, small group academic and behavior interventions. All of these are things that impact all students within one school building or one school system. Then you have selective measures, and selective measures are those that come into effect when universal measures have not been sufficient to ensure that a student is participating and succeeding. And that is why I have left both universal measures on the bottom and the selective measures in the middle, because selective measures cannot exist without universal measures. So selective measures are those that are non-significant curricular adaptations. So things like a differentiated curricular pathway, psychosocial pedagogical support, teaching and reinforcing what has been taught, having tutoring groups, for example. All of those things fall within selective measures. And again, every student at any point in their school life can access these measures. And then we have at the top the additional measures. For those of you who are familiar with the response to intervention model, this is very much based on a response to intervention model, because additional measures only kick in when universal measures and selective measures have not been sufficient. So additional measures, what do they look like? They look like the most stringent changes that you can possibly make. So those are, for example, modifications in the process, in the product of the learning environment, and they are addressing significant, persistent difficulties in communication, in interpersonal, in cognition, or in learning that require specialized support. So those can be things like complementing compulsory education, completing compulsory education by courses instead of by school year, significant curricular adaptations, individualized transitional plans, structured methodologies and strategies, and the development of competencies for personal and social autonomy. I should say, and I think it's important for people to be aware that Portugal is a country with a very well prepared cadre of teachers. In Portugal, you do not become a special education teacher unless you have been a regular education teacher for 5 years, which really gives a very well-rounded basis of pedagogy for special education teachers. Something else that you should also know is that special education teachers and the systems of support do not necessarily work with the student directly, but rather they work with the regular education teacher in order to support them to serve the students. So even though you might walk into a classroom and see a speech therapist, for example, working with a particular student, you might also see a speech therapist working with an entire classroom of students. You might also see a classroom in which you have 3 teachers working with the entire classroom and teaching simultaneously and collaboratively. So it is a transformation of the system, and it's not just a transformation of the school. It is important to transform the school. It is important to transform the classroom. And for that, we need to support teachers. And I absolutely agree with Gordon that teachers are the main, the pivotal person within this transformation. But it is also important to think about the entire system, because inclusive education is not just the responsibility of a Ministry of Education, but it is the responsibility of an entire government. And you need to think about the interconnected ways in which multiple ministries work to support each other. I think I will leave it here. I am not sure how long did I speak for? So I
Thanks, Paula.
apologize if I went over.
No, we wanted, there's a lot to cover, so thank you so much. And I've already been trying to triage questions that are coming in. Sorry, can people see? I am sorry. Am I still, can one of my team tell me if I'm still on?
We see now.
Thank
You
you.
are.
Sorry. So thank you. I'm trying to manage. We've got a number of questions from Russian participants to the 2 speakers. I am conscious of time, and I don't want to squeeze any of the other speakers' times. However, I will ask Gordon and Paula to just give a 1-minute response to a couple of questions that have come in, and then we will try to capture the other questions which I don't cover later in the Q&A. The first one, Gordon, I'll give to you, and it's really about your comment on that we need a plan to transform inclusive education, about the process of shifting from current systems to inclusive systems. And what are some of the first steps that school systems and governments should take on the path to inclusion? Gordon, if you can give us sort of a 1-minute first steps intervention, then I will take the next question for Paula.
Okay, well, it's the first thing is you need the people who are leading the system to understand what the change is and why it's important. So the people at the top of the structure need to establish policy, communicate it clearly. And then at, let's say, the regional level, at the school level, you need to take the time to make sure that people who are leaders are fully aware of their responsibility to lead the system. So that takes a fair amount of engagement. It doesn't happen in just one meeting. You need to have a number of occasions to share the information, share the mission, and discuss it with people. And then as you go, you spread the networking down. And I don't mean down in a sense of importance, but in terms of their responsibilities. So classroom teachers, support teachers, professionals, and others need to be engaged as well. And it takes a number of exposures and discussions, and then follow up coaching and supporting for those things to happen. And those things cost money. People need to be given the time and the occasion. They need the expertise by time. People from outside who need to be brought in to share what they need to learn. And this takes time and it takes resources. It's all part of a plan to change from a system that's fundamentally exclusive to one that's inclusive.
Thank you, Gordon. We'll probably come back to some more questions in that same theme area. I have, Paula, a couple of questions that are a lot to do from, and I'll try to paraphrase, about assessment of children, early identification, managing interagency coordination around early identification. Probably the most succinct way of asking you this question is that you said all assessment processes are compliant with the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities and the Convention on the Rights of Children. What does that mean in practice?
Well, what that means in practice is that, first of all, people who are involved in the education section, in the education sector, including early identification and early intervention, know that children have rights, that those rights are enshrined in international conventions, and that there are consequences for countries who do not follow up on their responsibilities towards those conventions. It also means that the legislation is aligned both in terms of definition of disability and interdisciplinary participation in decision-making, which is what is enshrined both in the CRC and the CRPD. In other words, no one, not any one person can make a decision for you without you being involved in that decision.
Thanks, Paula. I think we're touching on so many complex issues, and I do have a list of other questions. So those of you who have posted them, please know I'm trying to capture them, and I will come back to them in the general discussion. I do want to shift gears though, and turn our attention to the Russian context directly and the experiences in the Russian context. Our next speaker, Olga Golovanova, excuse my pronunciation, is going to talk about the training of professional competences of teachers for inclusive schools. And she's from the Department of City Psychological and Pedagogical Center of the Department of Education and Science for the City of Moscow. Apologies to the translators for speaking so quickly. And she's a leading expert of the Association of Inclusive Schools in Moscow. Olga, if you could turn on your camera so we can see. And Olga, you have 5 minutes.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые
Welcome and
коллеги.
thank you.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate in the conference. Definitely, it's a very important event for teachers who share their who are core thinkers and share the idea of inclusive education. I'm Peter Gordon, and I've been working with children with intellectual disability and also with severe and multiple disorders. And before we get to the project that was launched by the Psychological and Pedagogical Center of the Department of Education of Moscow, just I will skip my presentation for the sake of time. I will just speak on behalf of Moscow, and I will present it as a puzzle that consists of 36 elements. That's very important information, because every element consists of an inter-district council that brings together teachers and professionals. And for us to understand the context, we need to say that the educational institutions of Moscow are large educational centers with peaceful training centers, schools proper, and also vocational schools. So the council that brings these elements under its umbrella is to coordinate their activity within one district of Moscow to ensure high quality education and to transmit and share positive experience of working with different categories of students, in particular students with special educational needs. So several several words about the resource center, which works under the Department of Education of Moscow. There are about 70 educational institutions in Moscow. All in all, we have 600 educational institutions that are considered to be a resource center. In every district of Moscow, there are resource schools, a couple of them. It's not just a school where the students with special educational needs study, or not a school where we have exclusively students with special educational needs. They are schools where we have a mixture of students. And they have a whole vertical of inclusive education. They get into a preschool group. Parents of a special child know where their child will study in future. What educational model, maybe following the individual curriculum, they will be offered. And the school offers a continuous psychological and social support to such a student. And there are also some other resources to implement inclusive education. What is of importance? Resource schools is a resource center for other schools in the district because it shares the positive experience and inclusive practices. The project has existed for 5 years already, and there are more and more students, teachers, and schools that follow the idea of inclusive education. We have we started with 54 schools. Now there are 70 schools already, or educational centers now, that are part of this project. So the idea behind that is to have a comprehensive psychological and social support for students with special educational needs through access to special environment, which is in the immediate access to the student and his or her family. Adjustment measures and accommodation of the needs of the students are done. Psychological and social support, and also incorporation of the student into the community through various programs of additional education. And psychologists of the resource centers know how to form a special for the student, and also know how render assistance to their peers, to their colleagues in different schools. Over these years, we have gained experience following different educational trajectory. We have also we work in different formats on the basis of school, classroom, and even a group, tackling the needs of students. And also we form interdisciplinary teams of specialists with a special system of forming forming necessary environment for students to master the offered curriculum, so that such students attain the educational goals. Our experts offer a systemic support to all stakeholders, parents, teachers, not only of the city of Moscow and schools of Moscow, and also from schools from other regions. We transmit our positive experience in inclusive education and cooperate with the parent community and also professional community. For instance, we have the schools of partners of schools from regions of the Russian Federation, partners of school. We introduce that we work in different regions, and our schools also cooperate actively with the parents community. Yelena Bogorodnikova yesterday spoke about that, and She said that the city consultative platforms and expert community is a very important element, as we offer consultative support to all those who are in need for this. And the resource school form tolerant community, understanding peculiarities of any child within this community. Our resource school participates in different events, and they are placed on in social media and also on the site of schools. For instance, we have a day of people with disability. We promote information on different different elements of disability. There's special information on people with autistic spectrum disorder, with Down syndrome, to raise people's awareness and also to help those who work as teachers and professionals. We also strengthen links with different links with different communities, with different organizations. For instance, we have a festival 1+1, kids with special educational needs participate as peers in teams, and the achievements of resource schools is a participation in a vocational school contest, and this all gives us a positive experience. We take a very proactive stand, and this is a guideline for many in different schools. Sometimes we think that it is necessary to act as a role model for others, and then people will learn from you. We show that it works, and our children are success and may achieve many things. And this year, resource centers are found not only offer their help not only to Moscow schools, but also to schools in different regions. And we look for experts and professionals at our sites. We encourage them to join us in dialogue and share experience of the work. Dear colleagues, I encourage primarily colleagues from Russia to enter to get to the website of our city psychology and pedagogical center. I draw attention to different sessions that we have convened, and we had targeted sessions on help to parents, on help and assistance to kids with special needs, particular kinds of disabilities. And you also have access to our coordinators on inclusive education. I'm sure that all of us have enormous potential. We are together, and if we work shoulder to shoulder, we'll be able to achieve many things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga. I think all of the resources that you've just mentioned and your generous spirit of sharing, we can try to make the links available in the chat and after the webinar as well. I think you are an excellent example of what Gordon was saying about finding the heroes in the transformation and sharing the good stories. So thank you very much for sharing the experience from Moscow and beyond. Our next speaker, Alexandra Sergievna, apologies again for my pronunciation, is the head of the Laboratory of Inclusive Education of the Institute of Education Development of the Udmurt Republic. So she's going to talk about a different city experience of inclusive education. Alexandra, I think I can see you on the screen, and if I turn off my camera, you'll be in the, yeah, there she is. Thank you. Welcome.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon, colleagues, I'm very glad for having the chance to participate in this webinar. I represent Udmurtia Ijevsk. We are situated quite a long way away from Moscow, and we had a very difficult way, a path towards inclusion. We were working with a number of families that had children with problems in hearing, and we wanted to open an integrated group and received a refusal. We were told that it wouldn't be beneficial for the children of the general education school. And then we turned to television journalists, influential people, and in 2002, a group for young children was opened, and it was an experimental group, and we started working along the lines of inclusion. Well, a team of parents and teachers and started working with us, and we introduced all their experiences into the educational process for all the children concerned. We saw that our methods were highly efficient and effective for every single child. We started scientific research because we needed to see how well we were doing. Well, actually, we were quite successful. The children that graduated from these classes entered universities, and now we're working with new kids, and we understand that we have to work out a consecutive system within the general educational system. We were starting to look for a new school, but the situation has changed for the better, of course, and we found such a school that was interested in accepting children into the general educational plan. And together with the teachers of the school, we started working on an initial project. We focused on two key strategies: the development of the educational skills, so that children could work with different educational sources, be able to build graphs, tables, work on different algorithms. Children started working in pairs and groups, individually. There were assistants that teachers employed in the process. We knew that when the child would pass from primary to secondary education, he would encounter a number of different teachers who may not be able to adapt so quickly. And we needed to build a teamwork in the class amongst the classmates. And the teachers who came to work into the inclusive classes, they were able to build such a friendly atmosphere of total and mutual support. The second point, apart from educational skills, we wanted to provide a space for self-realization of every child, for the child to be able to test himself in all grounds, so to say. We organized theater, an all-inclusive theater, where children participated in theatrical performances. And the experts, the producers, didn't care about who was in the team. Everybody was treated equally. And these theatrical performances were quite successful and had been able to form a very friendly team of parents, creative experts, and children. There's also a zoo we have in our town, and we decided to provide a special program of interaction of children in the inclusive school with the life of the zoo. And it's interesting that every child actually wrote a book on his experiences in working in the zoo about different animals. The project became very successful, and a school for blind children learned of our experience and took up on our experience as well. We introduced all sorts of different activities, robot technology, sports, allowing for children to interact and try themselves at different abilities. Our school became an avant-garde school, so to say, a pioneer project, and an example for other organizations, other schools and parents. Now we have created a network of inclusive schools, and it's a dynamic process and work in process. We are a resource center currently. We provide for corporate education. We provide for additional education for teachers and heads of different organizations. Currently, I'm slightly worried about the formalization of this process. It's becoming more formal. I would have liked more initiative, more support on the part of the officials and public organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry that we have such limited time to hear about the good examples that you're involved in. I think that we hope that this will just be the beginning of a discussion, so there will be many more opportunities for you to share. I'm also very conscious that we're about to switch gears into some more examples across different cities and jurisdictions in Moscow and schools. However, just before I do that, I'm trying to capture some of the questions as are our team. I'm going to make a suggestion, and I'm going to probably throw my team into stress at the moment. There are questions that people have given us that are directed to the English-speaking presenters. I'm going to ask the team and Paula and Gordon if we can start to respond to some of those questions in the chat box. So what I will do is ask, if the question's been asked in Russian, I will ask, if possible, for a quick translation of the question into English directed to Paula or Gordon. And then we'll ask Paula or Gordon, if possible, to write something in the chat box, which gives a bit of a hint at the answer. Many of these are complex questions which require more than just a written answer, but I want to make sure the conversation continues. So there's one question that I can see in English. Gordon, I don't know if you can see in the chat box, but one of them directed to you, which refers to independence and supporting children in education to become independent in the community. And then Paula, there are some questions which are in Russian, which we'll translate, about coordination between systems. I think there are also some questions which apply to all of the speakers. So please, to the Russian speakers as well, please feel free to go to the chat box and to try to respond to some of the questions that are emerging. I think that will keep the conversation going. And I am hoping to protect some time at the end of the next session for a general conversation. The next session, we have a number of speakers, and I'm going to let the speakers know ahead of time that what we're going to do is give you your 5 minutes. At 4-minute mark, we will put a timer on the screen to let you know that you've got a minute left. So we will be monitoring the speakers. Otherwise, we will run out of time for everyone to speak. Please, as Denise said at the beginning, give us your highlights at the beginning, go right to your punchline, tell us the most important part of the story that you want to tell us today. This next session is intended to be a discussion on the topic of successful practices in creating accessible and inclusive environments for students and employees of educational institutions. Representatives of the teaching community will share their experiences in creating inclusive environments, implementation at the local level. They'll also take part in a general discussion if we have time and people keep to their time limits, where we'd like the speakers to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the approaches that they presented. We like to tell the good stories, but I think we all know that there are challenges in the process of change and challenges in achieving inclusion. We want to hear about those as well as the successes so that we can together talk through what some problem-solving techniques will be. So I'm going to start and have our first speaker, Olga Niyatsevia, is curator of the resource groups in 2 jurisdictions and regions, and she is going to talk about the implementation of inclusive education projects in preschool education. So Olga, if you could turn your camera on, that would signal where you are, I think. Excellent, I can see you. There you go. Welcome, Olga. You have 5 minutes, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to say a few words about the experience of Voronezh-Lipetsky region of preschool education, such as a resource group for children with autistic spectrum disorder. We have been working in this area for a number of years already. In 2020, there were 141 children with this disorder who received psychological support. 85 of such children went to kindergarten and used the models of a resource group. Others were members either of the groups of compensatory measures or others. In other words, the parents were choosing a particular model. Any family who wanted their child to work within a group of a resource model had such a chance. So what is this resource group? What is the difference between it and the others? It uses an application analysis model based on a scientific approach. I would like to point out that applicable analysis of behavior is introduced into the curriculum of higher educational establishments, preparing teachers for schools, for every educational establishment. And every teacher has the opportunity to enter such a group free of charge in Russia. It allows for the creation of an introduction of social adaptation for the child in his or her preschool years, and allows for passing on to the inclusive stage of education. When the child comes to a resource group, the specialist who works in this area provides for an individual educational program that allows for the correction of the difficulties, behavioral difficulties, adaptations, provides for the development of adaptation skills. And the second part of the work is dedicated to the developmental issues. When the child enters a resource group, we very smoothly switch him into the educational process. The child starts learning skills, basic skills, allowing the child to be successful in an inclusive group. The inclusive group also provides education provides the opportunity to study in groups. In other words, the resource education, the resource groups allow us to prepare the child for future education in a classroom. Well, above all, we deal with the frustrations of the child. We also work with the anxieties of the parents, and this makes it possible for a child with an autistic disorder to be successful in inclusive education. And in the future, such an approach allows the child to independently study at school. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. My speech is over. I will be glad to answer all the questions.
Thank you, Olga. And again, sorry to make the presentation so short. There's so much good examples to be sharing. Our next speaker is Victoria Ufimtseva from the Network on Inclusive Laboratories. Victoria, I'm going to just hand it over and you can introduce yourself if you don't mind. Victoria, I don't see you.
Да. Здравствуйте, уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Victoria Ufimtseva. I'm a psychologist from Yekaterinburg. I work in 2 schools, and this is the project of the Incluversarium Network Inclusive Lab. Can you see the presentation?
Да, все отлично. Презентацию тоже видно.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is, excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Да. Это проект реализован
This project has been realized in Yekaterinburg, in Sverdlovsk district, organized within the framework of coordination of 3 schools, general education schools in different towns. It allows for a network and interaction between non-for-profit organizations, schools, parents, and other organizations, social partners who participate on an equitable basis in the process with the goal of developing creative abilities of children with special educational needs. The most important goal is to raise the educational level of the teachers and raise the success of the children and their educational level, including international level, and also to provide for the choice of vocational training in the future and providing support for pedagogical support, educational support. The results of our project is as follows.
We have been working since 2007. We have an inclusive network laboratory, Incluversarium, and we also encourage exchange among teachers through online services and there are various tools for sharing experience that was developed by a Moscow company. We have also a database bank for distance education for children with special educational needs. And we have developed or formed a special game on online academy, and the new generation chooses. That's a formational game play, actually, where children decide to take some position and to fulfill certain functions according to certain professions that they choose. And the results of the project is the following. Our participants decided to describe it in the chronicles, school chronicles that was created by 3 schools. That's a whole project. This Chronicles of School Life is a project that was financed by private funds for our school students. That was a free of charge participation, and each participant will get that book for free when this book is completed. So the work consisted of several stages, psychological and assessment, and assessment by speech therapist, and also participation in lessons of kindness. So we have a friend association, special people. They offer us lessons of kindness, and we also have special classes with a local university, and we also conduct classes for kids with special needs together with Urals Pedagogical University and some other universities of our city. Our students also participate in the volunteer movement together with the Fund Other World, and this project is called A Sparkle of Kindness. There were special projects of learning about disability for teachers and parents, and we set up a special WhatsApp group for parents with children with disabilities. We invite them to participate in our projects and cooperate with our partners from other cities and other regions, not only from Russia, but from abroad. And everything is done on the online format.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Victoria. I'm going to just keep rolling through the examples, and we'll save the questions which are piling up for after the presentations. Our next speaker is Irina Ratkevich, the director of the MBOU School number 139. Irina, can I ask you to turn on your camera, please?
Добрый день. Я приветствую всех участников этого интереснейшего.
I welcome every participant of this forum, and our school 139 of Samara carries out the practice of inclusive education for more than 10 years. We joined this area when the term inclusion was just first mentioned and began to replace the term that is more habitual for us, that is integration. I should say that more and more partners join us, and Moscow Perspectiva and Desnitsa from Samara, the Sail of Hope, another organization that is partner to us, and with their involvement, we participated in many trainings, seminars, and conferences. And through the help of these organizations, I was sent for a 3-week training and visit to the United States, and I gained a first-hand experience there, seeing that people not just speak about inclusion, but they practice inclusion, and this makes people happy. So listening to my colleagues from abroad and our Russian colleagues, I believe that we're on the right track. So we form and work on the legal framework, and this will ensure financing, training of the staff, etc. In my school, we have over 1,300 students and 100 with different forms of disability, including physical disability and autistic spectrum disorder, which are the most difficult, challenging group for getting involved in the community. We focus on the development of creative abilities of students with special educational needs through engaging them in contests, in creative groups. And our school is known in the city for its theatrical traditions. We have 3 theaters, which is only 4 years old. It's called We Are Together, with kids with limited health abilities. And so the challenge, or well, a surprise for the community was the Soul of a Pillow, play written by one of the local writers. So the idea behind that play is that all pillows are pillows. They're made of feather and down, but that pillow was a particular one. It was made of buckwheat. And that was the essence of, so how is it to be special? So we saw how our kids that played in that play were changing during the rehearsals. The idea to engage kids with special educational needs and special health issues is very important. And we also have another project. Sports makes people equal. Our football team went to Italy as a winner of a Moscow tournament. We also say that public organizations, non-commercial organizations become a very reliable support, especially in the pandemic. We worked on
нам помогла приобрести спортивный инвентарь.
And Desnitsa organization helped us to purchase sports accessories for kids with disabilities, and also tabs for our students to be on distance education. That was a true support for us, and I believe that through cooperation and collaboration we'll achieve a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irina, and thank you for keeping to your time. We're back on track with our timing, and if we can, we have 3 more speakers who I will introduce to give us different examples in different schools and school districts. This will allow us for a conversation which we hope the speakers will be able to contribute to. Our next speaker is Mariana Komenko, the director of MBOU school number 156 in Kazan. And she's going to talk about formation of an inclusive culture in education activities. Can I have Mariana turn on your camera, please? Good morning.
Добрый вечер уже, наверное, уважаемые коллеги.
Well, good evening, actually, for us. My name is Marina Khomenko. So I'm from school 156 Kazan, and I would like to speak not only about the school, where we have mainly students with autistic spectrum disorder, but also, well, I want to speak about inclusive education in Kazan. So for the resource schools that are already open, inclusive process is understood as a special educational process that helps children with a limited health be engaged in regular educational process with other children. So become part, make them part of the community and introduce them into school community. Our school works as an inclusive since 2015. We in 2020, already 12 resource centers were opened in Kazan. We have 51 students with health limitations, and we cover 4 types of disabilities. The basis is regular classes in school rooms with regular students, and also classes and learning in special groups and also at home. And this work is done by experts who work in schools, and currently we have a resource teacher, psychologist, tutors, special education specialists, and they all have proper training. We also have a special room that consists of several areas with a special office for psychologists, for speech therapists, and also a special education teacher. They have their offices as well. We asked the question whether teachers and parents are ready to accept students with special needs in their school. So our objective is to form a special atmosphere in the school by of teachers through seminars, training, and special work with parents is also envisaged. One of the examples is in school number 1. We offered broadcast of films of the film festival, breaking down barriers. So that attention of the public breaks down barriers and stereotypes and raises people's awareness. Parents, teachers, and even grandparents are participants to the festival. To tackle the objectives of inclusive atmosphere, we need to have a whole chain of action to be taken. We believe that this includes for us experience of joint work, a positive attitude to the current activity, and also this experience should be should be experienced by all elements of this chain, be that parent or school teacher and experts. And we have continuous support, offer continuous support to students and their parents, starting with preschool up to the graduation. We organize seminars to explain about the peculiarities of school children with special needs. We also organize conferences where teachers share their experience and meet with parents. Much depends on the positions that the class leader takes, the main teacher in the class. Irrespective of the potential behavioral challenges and mental state and intellectual state. In the afternoons, they have classes with speech therapists, with psychologists to train skills. And also we offer dance therapy and art therapy for our students. And inclusive culture is not spontaneous, but is a result of effort of the whole pedagogical staff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am losing track. I think our next speaker is Olga Mityasova, also the director of a school number 54. Olga.
Добрый день.
Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome.
Здравствуйте. Hello. Dear friends, I am grateful for inviting me to this conference. A couple of words about our educational organization. We are a regular secondary school in Nizhny Novgorod. At school number 54. I'm head of this educational. I have been head of the principal of this school for 6 years, and all through these years we have been promoting inclusive education. The models that we're introducing should be placed in the context of the kids that we have. We have a resource class for with autistic disorder spectrum. We also have children with delayed psychological development, with different physical disabilities, and we also offer different adjusted curricula that accommodate the needs of
Olga, I'm just going to ask you to slow down a little bit. I'm sorry, the
us.
translators are just trying to keep up, and I think I've been rushing everyone, so just a little slower, please. Apologies for interrupting.
Окей. Хорошо, я буду помедленнее.
Okay, we'll try to slow down. So we implement several adjusted curricula depending on the nosology or disabilities that the child has. And so on the basis of a request of parents and on the basis of the recommendations given by the pedagogical and psychological commission, we form environment for the students so that they feel comfortable in our educational platform. So we focus on functional literacy of our students, in particular for those who have special educational needs. The components of functional literacy are mainly given to those students with health limitations, and we ensure that they acquire information competence and also skills in communication and literacy. And we do not only provide material basis for that, but also offer methodological support that together with our colleagues from higher educational institutions. We work on special educational plans for teachers and educators. For each student, we make technical accommodations, and we'll also provide methodological support to teachers and parents. But besides that, we develop educational modules or blocks for students where items that are particularly necessary for a particular student are implemented. For instance, a module that encourages psychological development and development of practical skills for a particular student. And components of or elements of functional literacy.
We
so
working with the children with
school we
health
train
limitations,
these
so we provide
skills
for
their
social
better
adaptation skills.
adjustments in the community.
And we
We
also
also
provide
have
for the
special
development
modules
of certain
within
methods of
the
working within the
regular
curriculum
hours
and outside the
during
curriculum. Thanks to
extracurriculum
this social all
hours.
partners who
We are very
participate
grateful to our
in
partners
our
who
activities.
contribute to that. But
I would
our,
like to
yes, I
provide,
see
I
that
would like to
timing.
extend my gratitude
Our
to them.
main
Above
partners
all, I would
are
like to extend
definitely
my
parents
gratitude
of
to
the
the
kids,
parents
and we
participating
actively
in our
interact with them.
work.
The
And
results
the
of our work
results
give
are
us
very
joy.
high.
We participate in
practically in all the festivals of
inclusive
inclusive practices,
festivals,
and we
and
realize our
the
plans.
most
And the
important
most
thing is
important
that
impact is
we
for us
we have
is
access to
the
to
ability to
conferences where
participate
we
in
can share
international
experience with our
conferences and
colleagues,
learn
and
from
also
others and
learn from
share
our
our own
colleagues,
best
learn
practices,
from the
and also
models that
use the
already
best practices
exist,
and
and to
methods of
later to
other
introduce them
partners in
in
the
our educational
process.
and definitely we want to continue in
Well,
this
I
field,
would like
and
to
we encourage our
say that
students, our graduates to
thank you
acquire
very
higher
much
education,
for
and we
your
continue
attention, and I'm very glad for participating.
Thank you very much. Can I just make a note to the interpreters that the English translators were both speaking at the same time, so we had double translation. If the translators could.
Are we both still on? Or am I the only one speaking now? It's you see, we cannot hear each other, so
Yeah,
we
I realize. So
there might have been a minute where we okay. Sorry for that.
No worries. Thank you. Our final speaker is Yelena Nikolavna. Yelena, I'm going to ask you to turn on your microphone and your screen. Thank you. Welcome. Oh, no, wrong speaker. Sorry.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые
There
коллеги.
you are. Nice
Наша
to see you.
школа.
Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые коллеги.
Esteemed colleagues, I work as a teacher and psychologist in Tours, and we have been included in, we are providing for inclusive education. We have children who participate in the studies, children with diabetes, children with blindness and other disabilities. And we provided for the development of an inclusive system, provided for the change in the architectural elements and comfortable and convenient spaces for such children. But the most important thing is to introduce the technology of support of the representatives of the process, and therefore we pay special attention to the support of the teachers. So we think that teachers are playing one of the most important parts. They are included into the inclusive education as experts. And due to the specific elements of their profession, they need a special support on the part of the psychologists and on the part of the administration of schools. We provide support to teachers in form of consultations, specific, topical, and targeted consultations. Aimed at providing the knowledge on the psychological and physiological specific characteristics of the pupils. Apart from that, the psychological support is rendered by psychologists for those teachers who are very seriously emotionally involved in these processes. We also provide the expertise of experts on the part of the correction pedagogics, so-called correction pedagogics. And teachers can attend special courses, but teachers need continuous support. We have new young teachers joining our team on a regular basis, and therefore we worked out a program of the psychological support of teachers for specifically teachers working with children with special education needs. It's called a masterclass for teachers, and it is aimed at using psychological games and educational games in the educational process. Children with special needs and certain health limitations need to understand the instructions, how to carry out their work in class, how to do the exercises, and therefore we work out specific methods in order to provide high quality education for such children. Of course, teachers need to use and employ both educational methods and the correction methods for children with special needs. We also continue to work in the sphere of prevention. We have special psychological classes, special psychological support for the teachers. We work a number of guidelines for the teachers that demonstrates how to release tension, how to organize educational environment, how to release tension in the process of provision of education. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the speakers for a really rich description of some of the efforts that are happening in different schools and school districts. I think it points to a moment in the process of change that so many different groups are doing interesting and sometimes difficult things to try to make change and inclusion a reality. I've been trying to cluster some of the questions into themes. We were very disciplined about getting through the presentation, so we now do have a chance to have a conversation. I think what I'll do is start with a question each for Gordon and Paula, and I'm just going to give you both a bit of a chance to put your thoughts together. I'm going to ask you each a specific question, and then I'm going to ask for your general reflections on what you heard about some of the efforts that are happening in different schools and school districts. Why don't I start with Gordon? And Gordon, there's a number of questions about there's one question that specifically references Winnipeg, which I thought you might have seen in the chat box. It's really about how to prepare children to be included in the community. How does inclusive education, how do we include children with disabilities? What tools can be used to have them be welcomed in the school and in the classroom? And then how does that result in or support and prepare children to be included in their communities? So I'll give you that general question, and then I'll come back to you after I give Paula her question to ask you for some more general reflections.
Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, there needs to be a support system for children or for young adults when they leave school as they go into the community for their life after school. There needs to be a supportive network of perhaps agencies or individuals who help them. But in terms of the transition, my own experience is that in the last several years of public education, high school, it may be specific to, the school needs to work with parents and with the individual student and plan processes and programs and opportunities for the student to explore what they might want to do when their schooling is over. In many cases, this begins with leaving the school and visiting for perhaps an hour or an hour and a half a day, a number of different places where people work, and checking out what seems to be of interest to them. And then secondly, as perhaps the second year of this 2-year process goes on, they may spend more time at several specific locations where they have the kind of activity, social interaction, skill development that will make it possible for them to transition to a meaningful role in the community. So I think the details will be different for each individual student, but the process involves planning, cooperation, partnership between the parents, between the family, the individual student, and the school to link with the community and then bring about a transition to life in the community.
Thanks, Gordon. I'll come back to you for some more general comments in a moment. And I am going to also ask the Russian panelist speakers to comment in a moment. So just giving you heads up on that. Paula, I have, I think, a series of questions packed into one for you, which really is to do with the specific question in the chat box has been about the role of the medical commission, which will identify and diagnose children as having disability or having learning needs, and how that has been used to stream children into the segregated institutional schools. Any advice that you have about that? And then I'll just put in a kind of separate but related topic, which is the role of all of the various so-called experts and resource medical teams that are involved in early diagnosis and identification in many systems. So kind of a general question about the infrastructure around identifying disability and how that gets used. Any advice you have about redirecting those resources to be more productive and inclusive?
Thank you for the question. I don't think that there is really an easy answer to this. I think that this is the issue of the medical commissions is an issue that is very, very specific to a particular region of the world, specifically Eastern Europe, for example. It is one of the places where we see a really serious issue with the medical commissions. Medical commissions exist in the majority of the countries with the single purpose of providing disability benefits. So even in Portugal, we do have medical commissions that their only work, the only thing they do is to decide whether or not a person has a disability and whether or not that person shall receive a disability benefit and how much that disability benefit is supposed to be for. In Portugal, one of the ways in which we have done away with without a medical commission was with the introduction of the International Classification of Functioning, which really requires that you have several different professionals from several different areas of expertise to come together to make a plan for a child. So even though the International Classification of Functioning is only a tool, and it is not, you cannot have a system based on the International Classification of Functioning. What it is that it actually provides a common language for people from different sides of the spectrum to come together and talk about one same issue. So for example, in many countries, especially in countries that do not have a very solid early identification system, people don't really think about education for a child who is born with a disability until they get to school. Until then, it's not an issue because it's not something that it's in their daily, everyday lived life. But in reality, not thinking about education when a child is first identified with a disability, even if that is at year 0, it is actually a huge obstacle, because what happens is that you're wasting time that could be used on planning, as Gordon has continued to talk about, plan. You have to anticipate what is going on. You need to take into consideration school readiness and all of those things that need to be put into place if a child is going to be successful in school. If you only think about education for a child with a disability when they are about to enroll in 1st grade, you have lost 6 or 7 extremely valuable years of planning and of working. Medical teams are always necessary, because even if you think in terms of the CRPD, for you to have a disability, you need to have an impairment. And the people who actually recognize and diagnose an impairment are doctors. Now, does that give doctors the right or the ability to decide on a person's life? No, it doesn't, which is the reason why we need to involve social workers, and we need to involve education people, and we need to involve the parents, and we need to involve the family, because it has to be an answer constructed by a universe of people that goes well above and beyond doctors. Doctors may be able to recognize that a child has a broken leg and not know what to do about it. That is why they send them to rehab. That's why they send them to physical therapists. So there's a whole host of knowledge that is necessary to make those decisions that is not in the hands of doctors.
Thanks, Paula. I want to, I am going to make some time for the Russian panelists to comment on anything they've heard from Paula and Gordon that is surprising to them, and maybe have some questions from the panelists to each other. But I want to ask Gordon and Paula for one more minute by each of them. One of the, I guess, Gordon, as you listen to the different presentations from the panelists, you can see so much going on in different schools and so much innovation and activity. One of the themes that keeps coming through is what's the role of special educators, what's the role of support groups, resource centers, those kinds of things in the transition process. So it feels to me when I listen to the presenters that there is a moment in time where there's so much innovation happening, the process of change is started. In that change process, what are the roles of special educators, resource centers, any other reflections you have from listening to the speakers? Gordon.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, if you have a truly inclusive school, the focus is on helping the classroom teacher figure out a strategy to meet the needs of the student. So effectively, all of the people who surround the school and the student in the traditional special education system, the special teachers, the assistants, the psychologists, the therapists, all of those people have one job, and that is to say to the classroom teacher, what do you need help with? How can I help you? Now, that's the fundamental job of support people in an inclusive school. In the process of moving to that kind of model, I think people who have special expertise and training need to be willing to share their knowledge with regular school personnel and to surrender the special knowledge they have to make it a more generalized kind of knowledge to be used by the school, by the teacher directly. It's a challenging job, and it's one that needs to be nurtured over a period of a few years. The special education people, the people who work in the traditional systems, are still needed when you move to inclusive education. They're not going to be out of jobs. In fact, properly supporting schools to be inclusive will probably take more people to make it really successful. But they have to do their work in a different way. They do not assess children in order to define their defects. They assess children in order to help the teacher figure out practically, in a day-to-day sense, how they can provide instruction more effectively. So the role they play is supportive of the teacher. It's not before the child encounters the teacher. And the medical approach of finding deficits or defects is really of no value. The only thing that's of value is to explore the needs of the student as they pertain to how the student can be instructed more successfully.
Thanks, Gordon. I always think it's a shame we can't be together, because I think the interaction that you often have with educators points to this. And I've heard you say many times that you know little about disability diagnoses and different kinds of disability names, and much more about inclusion. And I think that when people journey down this road for inclusive education, the inclination is to always focus on the definition and the nature of the disability instead of on the inclusion practices that will help people learn and be part of their classroom.
Let me just say one more thing.
Yep.
In my experience, if you have good teachers who are well-trained and who teach effectively to students at large, they already know, I'm going to use a number, 95% of what they need to know to be successful with children who have a special need. They need help with the extra 5%. They don't need it all the time, but when they need it, it needs to be available. So most of the things that a successful teacher needs, they already know. They need to be coached and encouraged, and they need to be supported with the extras that are beyond their experience with specific children in a specific time situation.
Thanks, Gordon. That's I think really good reflection. Paula, a lot of questions coming up about coordination between and Gordon was, emphasizing the need for coordination between different actors in the community, parents and social workers, and you mentioned in your last comment. Any experiences from Portugal or other places where you've worked where that coordination works well, and how does it happen and who's involved in it? Or other reflections that you wanted to pick up on after listening to the panelists?
Yeah, I think that the coordination, especially the coordination at the area of early identification and early intervention, if you talk to people in Portugal, they will tell you that that is the most difficult area to work in and to be successful in, exactly because it requires so many people. And you absolutely have to have a case manager who is a person that knows the systems, not just the system, but the systems very well. It is not so much a question of knowing, of having the type of knowledge that we always think that we need to have. We need to know everything about autism. We need to know everything about blindness. We need to know everything about paralysis. We need to know, it's not about that. It's about knowing who are the people that know, and knowing how to make those connections between those people. As I said in my presentation, Portugal was a country of special schools. and special schools that were very close to children with a specific type of impairment. And that has changed. It changed with those special schools actually becoming support centers for the education system. But there have also been evaluations that have shown that over the years, some of those organizations that have become what we call resource centers have actually not advanced as much as they should have. And they have actually become more of an obstacle than a support system. And this is to say that although I believe that what Gordon said is a very real reality for all of us, which is that we need to have a lot of people that can support us and can support classroom teachers in the work that they do, you also need to be very conscious that not everybody can provide that support. So I think that the key here is to make sure that you have quality professionals that can support what you do. I would guess that in many schools, many special schools, many residential institutions that have children with disabilities that I have visited all over Eastern Europe and Central Asia, the people who work in those schools and in those centers do not have the knowledge and the skills necessary to work collaboratively with classroom teachers, with school principals, with families in order to be able to support inclusion. So you need to be very conscious and very, you need to be very picky as to who and how you choose to work with if you are going to advance inclusive education.
Thanks, Paula. I'm trying to think of how best to invite the panelists to reflect on what they've heard from the Russian panelists, to reflect on what they've heard from the international experiences, and to comment on whether there's anything surprising that they've learned today. I'm going to save the last word at the end for Sue Swenson, the president of Inclusion International, to come in and comment. Denise, maybe Denise is actively translating questions from Russian into English and back again in the chat box. So there's a lot of activity happening there. We're also giving people links to resources. Thank you for those who are posting those resources. Denise, any reflections or questions that you want to make about the international experience and how it might apply to what's happening with your partners and people who were presenting today? And if you're not ready to do that, if any of the panelists who spoke would be willing or interested in commenting on that.
Well, I'm not really ready to comment on that, but
sorry.
I mean, it's been very interesting because it's just been, the experience has been so different from the different cities. But I think maybe Svetlana, I can see Svetlana here, who was here yesterday, and she might want to say something because she is very involved in teaching and training teachers. So I can see her. She's turned on her camera, just waiting for us to ask her to comment.
I knew you would know.
Briefly, очень коротко. Свет, давай, скажи что-нибудь, может быть, ты хочешь добавить.
Спасибо большое. Если я займу, я буду очень рада.
I will take just 1 minute, not more. I'm very eager to contribute to the discussion because the topic that has been raised today is very urgent, it's very burning for us and important for the development of inclusive education. From the point of research, we engage in psychological and professional preparedness of teachers. We have been thinking about their profile of teachers in inclusive education and what competences should be part of their work. And what is the teacher that is capable of working in inclusive education? I will follow up on the two comments that were already made, with me. First is with the nosological approach, or when while listening, you may have noticed that this contradiction still stays in our mentality and in our practice. And that's a hurdle to the development of the idea of inclusion in education. We still focus on the medical diagnosis and which is or the word that is not, or the notion that is not clear for nosology or impairments. We get fixed on the concept that is not clear for us and do not move in the sphere that we are well versed in. But where should we be well versed? We should be very well aware how children develop and what they need, irrespective of their medical diagnosis. So it's not about cognitive abilities of teachers, but also related to the legal framework that regulates the development of inclusive education in our vast country. While when speaking about narrow or broad format of the development of the concept in education, promote again and again the idea that we need to focus on social dynamics and learning techniques. Thus, the idea should evolve and develop our mentality so that we step away from this medical diagnosis approach. And another point about our teachers, it's a great joy for us to hear what our colleagues from Portugal and Canada say, that there are special educators who work in mass schools, in regular schools, but they work with a classroom teacher primarily, and rarely they work directly with students. I've been reading the chat and listening to the presentations. Although there are resource schools and resource classes and resource support centers that we have in Russia, we still have not formed a model in full what a resource support to inclusive school teacher is. What methods, what knowledge should that teacher acquire to have inclusive education in regular schools? So that's a very important lesson for us to be learned, and that's what I learned from today, and I hope that was of use for my colleagues as well.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful to try to tie the conversation from the international experience into the current moment that the schools are in and that the different jurisdictions in Russia are in at the moment. I have a number of comments. Thank you, David, for your comments. Just to situate today's discussion, just to repeat that yesterday we were focused on international conceptions, theoretical frameworks of inclusive education. Today we've dug in a little bit deeper on the experience of transforming schools, focusing on teachers' support and teacher training in the classroom and in the school system. And on Thursday, in our third of the series, we will dig in much more deeply into the regional experiences, different regions of Russia and their experiences currently with inclusive education. In the chat box, rightfully, there have been discussions about the other stakeholders that we haven't really focused on: families, peer support. I heard one person on the panel talking about their peer support strategies in the classroom, students helping other students and learning together and sharing in the classroom. So I hope that we will, when we get into a more detailed regional analysis on Thursday, we'll be able to dig into some of those questions and issues more directly. Thank you all for your discipline in helping us stick to time. I would like to give the last word to Sue Swenson, the president of Inclusion International. She spoke yesterday, for those of you who joined us, about both her professional experience in the Obama administration, but also her experience as a mom. Sue, I'll let you reflect on today and sign us off when you are ready.
So, pardon me for getting personal. Your reflections have been brilliant today and very helpful. And Svetlana, thank you so much for pointing out that education has very little to do with diagnosis. And when we design education systems from the ground up that are inclusive, diagnosis becomes less and less important. And it's just about giving a child with a disability a chance to engage with excellent teaching the same way we give every other child an opportunity to do that. And it's something we can't do in special schools or residential schools or separate schools. The great teacher of physics is never in a residential school. The great teacher of literature is not in a separate segregated school. They are in the general education schools. And we need to find ways to make sure that children with disabilities in Russia have the same access to your culture and your science and your ideas that all other children have. It's really important. I keep thinking of Pushkin. I keep thinking that he had the courage to be both an insider and an outsider. He had the courage to criticize Russian society while he loved it and was a part of it. And I see so much of that in your comments here today and yesterday. I see so many of you struggling to both admire where you are and also seek to move somewhere else. And one thing I want to point out, I'm gonna guess 100% that Portugal and New Brunswick did not arrive at a position where they said, well, now we're done, we don't have to change anymore. I think they continue to criticize themselves, to look for new ideas, to find ways to take from international ideas to move beyond where they are. So to some extent, maybe I'm thinking of Trotsky and the permanent revolution. Perhaps what we need to do is find a way to get on that train and be a part of the revolution in education and allow Russia to stand up and say, here we have an example of really great inclusion. Now let's see if the rest of you can catch up with that. And one thing I want to point out, we learned that New Brunswick and a federal system built a beautiful inclusive system just in its province. They didn't have to change the whole national system to do that. Portugal, on the other hand, started with a deeply segregated commitment to special schools and did a cultural shift nationally all at once. These are different strategies and different ideas. And in the US, we have different ways of struggling with inclusion, even beyond that. So you will find your path. You will find a Russian path to doing this. And we need you. We need you to be part of the international community because of what you can invent, as well as because of what you can learn. So I'm very impressed by these webinars today and yesterday, and I look forward to tomorrow with a very open heart. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sue. So just a reminder that it's Thursday, not tomorrow.
Thank you.
And just a final.
I'll be sitting here waiting.
And just a final huge thank you to all of the speakers. I feel like we aren't able to do justice to so many interesting speakers. Thank you, Gordon and Paula, and all of our colleagues in Russia. And we look forward to talking to you again on Thursday.